Your dog just looked at you from across the room. Not at your hand, not at your food, at you. And for 1 second, you probably wondered what's actually happening behind those eyes. Is there a self in there at all, or just instinct wearing a friendly face? Most people assume the answer is simple. Dogs love us, dogs read us, but dogs don't really know who they are. That assumption comes from a single flawed test, and once you see why it's flawed, you'll never look at your dog the same way again. For decades, scientists used one method to measure self-awareness in animals. It's called the mirror test. You put a mark on an animal's body somewhere it can't normally see. Show it a mirror and watch what happens. Chimpanzees touch the mark, elephants touch the mark, dogs just sniff the glass and walk away. For a long time, that failure was treated as proof. No self-recognition, no sense of self, case closed. But what if the test itself was built for the wrong species? Here's the problem nobody talks about. The mirror test assumes vision is the most important sense an animal has. That's true for us. It's true for primates. It is not true for dogs. A dog's entire understanding of the world runs through its nose first and its eyes second. So testing dog self-awareness with a mirror is a little like testing human intelligence using a smell test. You'd fail too, and it wouldn't mean anything about how smart you are. Alexandra Horowitz, a cognitive scientist at Barnard College, thought about this problem for years. In 2017, she ran an experiment that quietly changed the conversation. Instead of a mirror, she gave dogs their own urine to smell, sometimes unaltered, sometimes spiked with a second scent. The dogs barely reacted to their own unaltered smell. They already knew it. But when their own scent had been changed, they lingered. They investigated. They noticed that something about themselves was different. Think about what that actually means. To notice a change in your own scent, you first have to have a baseline sense of what you smell like. That's not nothing. That's a dog quietly saying, I know what belongs to me and something here doesn't match. Horowitz called it the olfactory mirror, and it flips the entire self-awareness debate on its head. Dogs may have known who they were the whole time. We just weren't asking the question in a language they understood. So if dogs have some sense of self, how does it actually work? This is where it gets strange, because a dog's sense of self doesn't look like ours. Ours is built around memory, around a narrative, around the story we tell about who we are. A dog's self seems to be built around something else entirely, and one old experiment shows this almost by accident. You've probably seen the guilty dog look. Ears back, eyes wide, slinking away from a chewed shoe like it knows exactly what it did wrong. Horowitz tested this too, back in 2009. She set up a situation where owners scolded their dogs for eating a forbidden treat, but here's the twist. Sometimes the dog had actually eaten it, sometimes the dog hadn't touched it at all and was scolded anyway. The guilty look showed up just as strongly either way. That's uncomfortable, isn't it? It means the guilty look was never about guilt. It was about you. Your dog wasn't confessing to a crime, it was reading your tone, your posture, your energy, and responding to that, which suggests something quietly profound. A dog's sense of self might not live fully inside its own head. It might live in the space between you and them, built moment to moment out of how you react. Now, here's a fact almost nobody brings up, and it deserves more attention than it gets. In 2013, a group of French researchers ran an experiment using 9 dogs and a screen. They showed the dogs paired images, a dog face next to the face of some other species. Cats, wolves, humans, birds, 40 species in total. And without any training, the dogs consistently sorted the dog faces into their own mental category. Pugs, Great Danes, poodles, wolfhounds. Animals that share almost no visual resemblance to one another whatsoever. Stop and think about how strange that is. Dog breeds are the single most physically varied group of any mammal species on Earth. A Chihuahua and a Great Dane look about as similar as a mouse and a horse. And yet, using sight alone, dogs somehow grasp that both belong to the same category. They belong to too. That's not just recognition. That's abstraction. That's a dog holding a concept of my kind that survives even when the visual evidence says otherwise. But before this starts to sound like dogs are secretly reading your mind, there's a more recent study that pulls hard in the other direction. In 2025, researchers tested something called theory of mind in dogs, which is basically the ability to track what another individual does or doesn't know. They hid food while a human watched, then let a second human compete for it, one who had seen the hiding spot and one who hadn't. If dogs really understood what others know, they should favor the cup the ignorant competitor wouldn't know about. They didn't. The dogs chose randomly. It didn't matter who had seen what. And that's an important correction, because a lot of viral dog content claims your dog knows what you're thinking. The evidence says otherwise. Dogs are extraordinary at reading emotion, tone, and body language in the moment, but quietly tracking what's inside someone else's head over time, that may be a very human trick dogs never picked up. So where does the self-awareness actually show up, if not in mind reading? There's a newer, stranger test that almost never makes it into these videos. In 2021, researchers gave dogs a simple physical puzzle. They had the dog stand on a mat with a rope attached underneath, and the rope needed to be pulled to get a reward. The catch was that the dog itself was standing on the rope, blocking its own access. This is called the body as obstacle test, and in human toddlers, understanding that your own body can get in your own way is considered a genuine marker of self-awareness. Many dogs in this study figured it out. They stepped off their own bodies to complete the task, which means, on some level, they understood that me was a physical thing taking up space in the world, separate from the goal they wanted to reach. Here's a question worth sitting with for a second. If dogs weren't born understanding humans, would any of this even matter? Because there's a piece of evidence that changes the whole conversation. Scientists have tested wolves raised by humans from birth, bottle-fed, hand-raised, given every possible chance to bond. Even those wolves largely fail to follow a simple human point toward hidden food. Domestic dog puppies, just weeks old, with almost no meaningful contact with people yet, succeed almost instantly. That's the detail that should stop you. It means reading you isn't something your dog learned from living in your house. It was already written into the genome before your dog ever met you. Thousands of years of domestication didn't just change behavior. It rewired the starting point. And that rewiring goes deeper than behavior alone. A 2025 neuroscience study compared the brains of modern pet dogs to more ancient, less domesticated dog populations, including village dogs and primitive breeds still close to their ancestral form. Modern dogs showed larger areas tied to social communication, and a noticeably smaller amygdala, the brain's fear center, compared to their ancestors. In other words, living beside humans didn't just train dogs to behave differently, it physically reshaped the architecture of the dog brain over generations. Before we go further, it's worth pausing on something easy to forget. Almost everything you've just heard comes from research on Western pet dogs, a small, genetically narrow slice of the global dog population. Free-ranging dogs, the ones that make up the majority of dogs worldwide, live a completely different relationship with humans, more distant, more independent, less centered on a single owner. So the question, do dogs know their pets, might only make sense for a minority of dogs on the planet. For most dogs alive right now, pet was never really the relationship to begin with. And to be fair, not every scientist is convinced by any of this. Critics of the olfactory mirror test point out that no species outside primates, not dogs, not elephants, not dolphins, not even magpies, has produced fully reproducible, undeniable proof of self-recognition in any sense. Some researchers think we're reading intention into behavior that might just be sensitive instinct dressed up as insight. That skepticism matters. It's what keeps this science honest instead of turning it into another feel-good animal video with no real evidence behind it. So, does your dog know it's a pet? Probably not in the way you mean it. It likely doesn't sit there thinking, I belong to a human, I live in a house, this is my life now, but it does seem to know something. It knows its own scent well enough to notice when that scent changes. It knows its own body well enough to move it out of its own way. It knows the difference between its kind and every other kind on Earth, just by looking. And it was born already wired to read you before it ever had a reason to. Maybe that's not a lesser kind of self-awareness. Maybe it's just a different one, built for a different sense, shaped by a different history, tuned to a different kind of relationship. Somewhere, between instinct and understanding, your dog has an answer to who it is. It's just never been able to tell you in words. Your dog looked at you again just now. maybe it's not wondering what's happening behind your eyes. Maybe, in its own quiet way, it already knows.